Hello! Hey. My name is Brian, and today we are talking about the future of the enterprise desktop. That's what I do when I'm behind podiums. So, I feel like obviously so much of us are desktop professionals, and as I mentioned in the opening keynote, we built our careers around delivering and managing desktops. And some of my favorite ways to consider the desktop, I've got one of these classic images I've been using for a long time. That's if I were to ask you about your desktop and your desktop strategy, this is it, right? If you were to sum up your current desktop strategy, in one slide for the past 20 years, that's it. You call Dell or you call HP or Lenovo and you just order them by the forklift load full. And, for a long time that was fine, really. And frankly, this all kind of changed in 2006, because 2006, I don't know, how many of you attended VMworld 2006, where you learned that 2006 is the year of VDI? Dun, dun, dun. Shit's gonna change, man. The tyranny of desktops, all that management of having to unplug things and work with cardboard and that kind of stuff is all going away because we have VDI. We're virtualizing that. Now, clearly, 2006 gave way to 2007, where we were told 2007 is the year of VDI, because it didn't quite happen in 2006. And I seem to recall 2007, oh yeah, we got a better connection broker now, and then 2008, oh yeah, we're going to have a different protocol, and then it's going to work, and 2009, we're more WAN efficient, and then 2010, we're going to work with USB devices, and then 2011, we're going to work with GPUs, and then finally I can tell you here at the 12th BriForum in July 2012 that this is the year of our 9th Geek Out. Looking forward to that tonight. And I've joked before, so if this is what our desktops were for the past 20 years, what do you think our desktops of the next 20 years are going to look like? Bink. And I'm fine with that. Now, when we talk about the future, though, the future of desktops, that's what we're here to think about, where things are going. 40 years from now. This is 40 years from 1960. This is how we will live. This is the IT professional. And you know how this dude's delivering desktops? It's all VDI, man. It's the future. VDI desktops, as we were told in 2006, retrofuturism applies to spaceships and desktop delivery, apparently. So this is the future we were promised back in 2006. But one of the core tenets that I have for today is that the future of the desktop, in fact, is not VDI. And so I want to take a couple minutes to sort of explore why that's the case. And I'll go through this quick. How many of you read The VDI Delusion, the book? Anyone? That's cool. How many of you read it legally? Some of the hands low enough. Yeah, it's on the BitTorrent. $10 though. Come on, $10. So VDI, as you know, VDI was a big promise, and we were all very excited about it over the past 4, 5, 6 years. And if you look at the market penetration of VDI now, it's there, but we're certainly not all taking all of our desktops and replacing them all with VDI. Like, how many of us today are using VDI? I mean, we've got, I see a lot of laptops here. Even all the Wise folks, as soon as Dell bought them, are now all carrying Dell laptops. Like, the instant they could throw away those Wise Thing clients that they loved, they're all like Dell Ultrabooks now. So the reason this whole like VDI, and VDI is kind of, we talk about desktop virtualization as being more than VDI, but VDI has gotten a lot of the focus over the past 5 years or so. There's a lot of reasons that VDI is not the future of desktop. And I'll kind of go through this quickly. I mean, first of all, the fact that VDI is not cheaper than traditional desktops. It just isn't. Which is fine, because VDI, gives you more features than traditional desktops, right? VDI gives you the ability to, you can walk up to any computer in the world, anywhere on the planet, and within like 100 keystrokes, be accessing your entire corporate desktop. That's a cool new feature. VDI allows you to have a rock fall on your laptop, or a beer, hypothetically, and walk to the next laptop and just type a few characters and be right back where you picked off, VDI allows you to do live migrations on the back end, so you can have rolling hardware upgrades, and your desktop is running 24 hours a day for years and years, assuming it's not running Windows. So VDI has lots of cool things. But all these new features, we have to pay more for these new features, and which is fine. Because anytime, if I have something that is old and shitty, and I replace it with something that is new and awesome, that new and awesome thing, it costs more money. Now, it's got new and awesome features. I talk about, when I use this car analogy, this new car, it will heat, cool, and massage my ass while it is parallel parking itself. That's a true story. That's badass, amazing new features. But I don't for an instant expect this new car to be cheaper than my old car. Like, what planet is that from? Have you heard of math? Or society or economics? The same applies to VDI. So VDI is awesome and provides us lots of new features, but saving money is not one of these new features. Now, incidentally, whenever I tell this story, someone always objects and is like, well, okay, that might be fine for the 99%, but for us, it is about saving money. And I'm like, yeah, the hell it is. And then they say, no, it is. And I say, okay, try me. And so, give an example. A guy says, hey, for us, we're buying new PCs, $1,000 PCs every 4 years. We go with the VDI. Instead of buying $1,000 PCs, we can buy $200 thin clients. So $800 is left over. Now, we have to buy the back-end VDI, right? The servers, the storage, the licenses, all that kind of stuff. But he says, I think we can do that for about $500 per user. So they're now spending $700 per user, where before they're spending $1,000. So he says, I get what you're saying. You got to be like, all up on stage and stuff. But for me, we're saving money by VDI. Of course, while he's saying this, I've fired open the Google, and I'm typing in how to lie with cost models. And just click on the first response there, which is you can just go, I'm feeling lucky, and hey, here's our easy 11-step guide on how to lie with cost models. You can make cost models prove whatever you want, which is a great tool to have in your back pocket. In this guy's case, let's dig into his cheaper, right? His desktop that is cheaper, I don't know if you bought desktop computers recently. You know what you can get for $1,000? A lot. We're like 4, 8 cores, like GPU, like dual DVI, USB 3, probably SSD maybe even. You can buy a lot of goddamn computer for $1,000. You know what that $200 thin client has? VGA, PS2. It's not, and even better, that $500 per user back-end kit. Oh yeah, so how do you come across the $500 per user? Well, we got the server, it's got 6 cores, we're putting 40 users on it. Okay, so now you're putting 4 users per core, right? Yeah? Okay, before you had 4 cores per user. So you divided your CPU available to the user by 16, right? Well, no shit, that's cheaper. But it's not cheaper because of VDI. It's cheaper because you hacked the user experience. Like hacked with a machete, right? You had 4 cores, dual screens, USB 3, everything local, super fast GPU, and you give them single monitor VGA, single channel audio with 1/4 of a core they're sharing with 3 of their closest cubicle friends. That is cheaper. It's way the hell cheaper. But it's not cheaper because it's VDI. You see what's happening here? They just they did it at the same time as they did the VDI. But if I want to save money, I'm not talking about VDI at all. If I'm saving money, I'm not buying a $1,000 goddamn computer every 4 years. I'm buying it for $300 Dell for my users every 6 years. And that's how I'm saving money. So that saves even more money than VDI would save. So in that case, did that guy save money with VDI? Absolutely. Was it because of VDI? No. And whenever I tell the story, people always say, well, hang on, that's CapEx, right? OpEx is where it's savings. VDI is cheaper because it's easier to manage. Which brings me to my second clutch point about VDI, which is VDI is not easier to manage. And why do people think that VDI is easier to manage? Probably because of this guy who sold them VDI, said something along the lines of, oh yeah, way easier to manage because you're just managing one disk image for all of your users. If you have 1,000 users, what's easier to manage? One disk image or 1,000 disk images? I would say one disk image. That is way easier to manage. But it's interesting, if you look at this, let's say this is our VDI host. It can be vSphere, Hyper-V, whatever. I've got a bunch of VMs on here and a bunch of disk images. This is sort of like the old way of all of these computers have their own disk images. But with VDI, I want just one disk image, right? And then all of my user sessions will share that single disk image. So I mark that single disk image as read-only, like no one can F it up, That's cool. Now, of course, logistically, to make it happen, I can't literally have all these machines booting that same image at the same time, so I mark that as read-only, and then each user gets their own Delta differential clone file. And this is VMware linked clones, this is Citrix provisioning server, this is Flex clone, and this, every vendor, VDI vendor, storage vendor, they all have some version of this, right? And this is sold as, your read-only copy, that central copy is locked down, that's cool. And then all the changes go into all these little sections. Well, the problem with this is that every time you update that master image, you have to blow away all of those individual little changes. So users can't, it's not like using computers today where users save whatever they want, because they save whatever they want until Patch Tuesday, and then those things are all obliterated. So the way the people selling this get around it is they say, nah. You got your read-only copy everyone's sharing. You got your little read-write sliver that's unique for each user, and just think of those together as the OS. And then take all the user settings and put them somewhere else. That somewhere else can be a different partition. It can be into the AppSense or Triceratops or RES or View Persona or UPM or Ringcube layer or user data disk or whatever, right? You just put all the user settings somewhere else and call that your user data. So now when you blow away that OS partition, you can blow it away once, you can blow it away twice, you can do whatever you want, but that user data doesn't change at all, right? And that is how you allow all of your users to share that master read-only copy of Windows. You're on board, right? This is what everyone's saying. Now, it seems, by the way, what I just described, all that is what I need to make this VDI easier to manage with one disk image. Because if I got a scenario where I'm connected into my desktop in the data center, and all my users are sharing that same disk image as read-only that they can't individually change, God, there's got to be a better way. I don't remember I don't know, maybe not. I feel like there's a better way, though. So what ends up happening, incidentally, is that if you want this desktops in the data center that are all shared and locked down, we don't need VDI to do that. We can do that with terminal server. There's plenty of videos with me, by the way, on terminal server versus VDI. There's plenty of cases where VDI makes more sense. Just Google my name and terminal server versus VDI, and you can watch hours of fun. But my point is, so with VDI, what we end up doing, because VDI is awesome, I love it, be clear, right? But I love it with individual disk images. I love it where every user is different. Even if I'm using AppSense and RES, even if I'm using ThinApp and AppV and all that kind of stuff, maybe my users don't even have admin rights. But I love the fact that every user has his or her own image. So my point is this. The people who say that VDI is easier to manage than traditional because all users share the same disk image How does all users sharing the same disk image work? It only works if we lock down that gold master and then redirect all of our changes into these little delta differential files. Well, locking down the gold master, redirecting changes somewhere else so I can re-image my VM at any time, where exactly do I need VDI to do that? Like, haven't you heard of Ghost and Altiris and SCCM? For real, that's way easier. So, is managing one disk image easier than managing 1,000? Hell yeah, it is. It's way easier. It's way cheaper. But this has nothing to do with VDI. I can do that today. If you're in an environment today, how many of you have traditional users in your environment that have their own machines? You're all blowing those away every night with Ghost, right? They're all locked down, and you're re-ghosting them every night. Everything's in AppV, right? Anyone not? Wait, why not? Why not? Not all your applications are compatible with AppV. It's complex. Not everything. It's a lot to learn. Oh, okay. Well, then how in the F do you think you're going to do VDI then? If you can't get your shit together in the past 20 years and take away admin rights from your users and lock everything down, then how in the hell do you suddenly think that VDI is magically going to make it that all of a sudden all your applications don't need admin rights and you suddenly know what you're doing? And oh, by the way, while you're making that gigantic goddamn change, you're also taking the user execution, putting it far away, and completely changing the way that the users do everything. And dividing the amount of CPU you're giving them by 16. It's weird that there's so many projects that are stuck in pilot. So to be clear, is managing a single disk image just locked down cheaper? Yes. Should that be a goal for us? Absolutely. Do we need VDI to do that? No. We can do that with VDI. That's fine. And if we do this, it could be cheaper than the old way. But to be clear, it's not cheaper because of VDI. It's not easier to manage because of VDI. It's easier to manage because we're taking away admin rights. And we're taking away users' ability to use weird software that doesn't work in ThinApp or AppV. That is cheaper. But again, not because of VDI. It is easier to manage, not because of VDI. Another myth about VDI is that the VDI, I'll tell you flat out, VDI, it is not more secure than traditional desktops. For any more details, just watch the video from today, from 3 hours ago, from Tal Klein and Simon Crosby. I won't get into this because we talked about it for 75 minutes in there. By the way, to be clear, VDI is not more secure than traditional desktops. It's not less secure than traditional desktops. You're just moving your problem around. Like Simon's main point was, people say, oh, it's in the data center, there's less on the endpoint. That's fine, but like hacking the endpoint is not that big of a deal. And frankly, if I was secured about the endpoint, they make encryption software that you can put on your endpoint that costs like $12 per user. So you don't need VDI to have a secure endpoint. The way that people get compromised is, like they mentioned the RSA thing. It comes in via email, and you click on attachments, and then now you can prevent that with all this intrusion detection and software, but you have to run that regardless of whether you have VDI or not. So VDI, it's great. It's no more secure than desktops. It's no less secure. It's still Windows. Has the same security. There's no easy wins there. The fourth problem with VDI that prevents it from being the full-on future of the desktop is that moving a desktop from the desk to the data center fucking blows. Wait, what time is it? Man, oh man. But that experience sucks, man. You know? And it's just not good. It's just not good. It's just not a good user experience compared to what you had before in terms of the protocol remoting. And like, look at Simon and Tal made this point also. We invented conferences so that we could make our VDI. We have sessions about all the money we can spend on MIPS and flops and whatevers and doodads to make it so we can watch goddamn YouTube videos as good as we could on our 386 with the math coprocessor. Like, that's our goal, is trying to make VDI perform as good as our computer is 12 years old. Kind of true. So, and a lot of people say, but we've been talking about remoting protocols with Citrix ICA and stuff like since the 1990s, and by now, come on, like now it's 2012, right? The remoting problem is great. Look at how awesome PC over IP is, look at how awesome HDX is, look at how awesome RemoteFX in 2012 is. Didn't we solve this remoting problem before? We're done. Like, how is this still an issue? How can I stand here and say that remoting is still an issue a limitation in 2012. I'll tell you flat out. You all know this triangle of fast, cheap, and easy. Pick two, right? You heard this business thing? Have you seen the triangle of remoting protocols? It's called good user experience, low bandwidth, and low CPU. Pick two. Think about it, right? So if I want a great user experience over low bandwidth, I'm going to need a lot of processing to do all that like super advanced compression. If I want a good user experience but with really low CPU, I better have a lot of bandwidth. And if I want not a lot of CPU and not using a lot of bandwidth, I'm not going to have a good user experience. Now, people challenge me on this. Because they're like, bro, you put the same slide up in 1998. True fact. So, but they said, 1998 to now, our CPU is like 1,000 times more than we had before. 1998 to now, our bandwidth is like 100 times more. So, shouldn't we have this solved? How is this still an issue today? I said, oh, you're right, man. Today's CPU and today's bandwidth can deliver the shit out of a 1998 user experience. You want that 800 by 600, 256 colors, running Word? There was no YouTube in 1998, right? I can deliver that like crazy. The problem is we have Moore's law for CPU and probably whoever's, Chambers' law for bandwidth or whatever. Well, we got like goddamn user's law for user experience, where that expectation changes every few years also. So now, because what are we trying to do with VDI? Like dual displays, 1900 by 1200, times 32-bit color, times 3D sound, times USB, times whatever else is there, like multi-touch, right? Like, geez, now it's not even enough that we got the mouse working. We want to know how many fingers you're using and how hard you're pushing. And I got to remote all that stuff. And we got to remote GPS status and which direction the screen is. Are you kidding me? And as soon as we just got USB figured out, and now there's USB 3. And now there's Thunderbolts and like doodads with like fingerprint readers and all this garbage. So remoting the Windows user experience will always be a lesser experience than what we can have with local execution. So whenever I talk about this, by the way, and I talk about how the future of the Windows desktop is not VDI, people always ask about whether I hate VDI. And no, I love VDI. This is me and VDI. Right? You want the Twitter? This is me and VDI. We're like that. Guy in the front says, who's on top? Which vendor? And so, to be clear, VDI, love it. When we wrote the VDI delusion, that may have been a bad choice for the title, because I think a lot of people criticized us for writing the book, and if you criticized us, that was clear you only read the title and nothing past it. What we feel like was delusional, it's Gabe, Jack, and me wrote this book. What's delusional is this idea that you're going to replace all your Windows desktops with VDI desktops. That's delusional. But VDI does make sense. As I said, it does give you a lot of new cool features if you understand, hey, we're not doing it to be more secure. We're not doing it to save on management. It'll be actually more expensive than our $300 Dells. Oh my gosh. If I got people who want to work remotely, if I got people who I want to make one tweet and in 30 seconds I can have 1,000 users working from a different location, walk to any VDI is awesome for this kind of stuff. But just know what you're getting. Put it in context, I guess. And when I talk about desktops, I've used this drawing in the past where I say, imagine all these blue boxes are your traditional Windows desktops that you have been dealing with for the past 20 years. 10, 12 years ago, we added some terminal server into this environment. We didn't replace everything with terminal server, we just added some terminal server. And those of us who are successful with VDI add some VDI to this environment, not painting this whole environment red. We can also add some client-based virtual machines in this environment. We can add some OS streaming into this environment. This, I talk about as the rainbow of complexity. This is the way that we deliver desktops now. And that's the key. Now, what these all have in common is they're all running Windows. And now some people say, well, but that is more complex, and should my goal be to have one Windows image across all of this and manage them all as one? I don't know. Do you do that today? I mean, frankly, all these boxes that are blue on there, they're not really all the same model of desktop. You got big ones, little ones, laptops, HPs, Dells, Lenovo's, all these different ones in there. So if we were to add those in, the amount of different types of machines that you're delivering Windows to, if you have 1,000 users, there's probably 1,200 different hardware profiles that you're delivering machines to. But the only way, by the way, that you can get your head around this, and the only way you can be successful with Windows is to not try and manage all this hardware stuff, and think about Windows and what you're delivering with Windows. Think about delivering your applications as a service into Windows, your user connections and settings as a service. This is what we've been talking about for 10 years. It's what Microsoft is talking about. It's what VMware is talking about. It's what Citrix and Quest and Dell, it's what everyone's talking about. So we all know this, that we have to sort of get out of the fray of this hardware stuff. And for me, what's important to understand is that VDI, it is not a future of Windows, as I mentioned, but VDI, it's not even a major game changer in my book. To me, VDI is just another form factor. So, and in the past, the things we love come in many forms, right? Same shit, different bottle. That's what VDI is. There's your tweet. Same shit, different bottle. Because before, we had desktops. And our desktops, now imagine when we only had like physical desktop computers, when the laptop came out, today we don't view the laptop as like a strategic thing at all. It's like desktop and laptop, they're called the same thing, right? But imagine when the laptop actually first came out, how big of a deal that was for us. Different hardware, different drivers, different profile machine, because they were way less powerful than the desktop computers were. Plus, we never had a concept of VPN or remote access or dial-up, when it was all desktop computers. So we had to add that whole group to our department and figure out policies and encryption and all these things. Like laptops fucked our shit up as IT when we just had the desktop world. And that's what VDI is doing for us now. But once we got past the laptops and like kind of chilled out about it and realized, okay, now basically this is just the way things are, we don't have a fundamentally different strategy for laptops than we do for desktops. Sure, different drivers and that kind of stuff, but the way we deploy AppV and ThinApp and Windows and profiles, it's all the same. That's the same with VDI. So VDI to us, I love VDI like I love laptops. I don't want to live in a world that's just desktops and no laptops. I don't want to live in a world that's just desktops and laptops and no VDI. I don't want to live in a world that's just desktops, laptops, VDI, and no client VMs. I love all this. But none of these are game changers because it's still all about delivering Windows desktops. And that's the thing. That's why when I talk about VDI and its impact, the one takeaway from VDI is still about delivering Microsoft Windows desktops. So, love it, cool form factor, but it is not the future of the desktop. Now, interestingly, this session is the future of the desktop. So, if the future of the desktop is not VDI, what the hell is it? So, let's look at that. I mentioned in the keynote, were most of you in the keynote before? I'll just quickly go through that. Remember I mentioned before that because we within IT have gotten good at delivering the Microsoft Windows user experience to users in different formats. So we have installed natively on client machines. We have Windows multi-sessions on terminal servers. We have Windows via VDI. We have Windows in virtual machines running on clients. This is the way that we have done desktops for the past 20 years. And as long as our desktop actually was used on a desk, I guess. I mean, as long as I had a keyboard and some kind of precision pointing device, mouse, trackpad, etc., there is no impetus for us to change. So we would have been like fat, dumb, and happy delivering this Microsoft Windows desktop for the next 20 years if it wasn't for one man. And, we can curse him all the way, but man, he changed things. And as you know, we joked before about how when users start bringing in these devices with no keyboards and no precision mice, our freak out was just to do what we thought we knew best and just try and put Windows, like the gateway to us as IT is this Microsoft Windows desktop. So yeah, and we even thought the VDI internal server was the solution to this because, oh my gosh, yeah, we can support whatever device and whatever hardware you want, and it's, it's good security and performance, so we thought that was all fine. And again, I don't blame us for this. This is human nature. Like you've all heard this, the very famous thing, like when Henry Ford was like inventing the car, he said, if I had asked customers what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. And so, like we as humans don't really have a good ability to sort of think, like very few of us, I guess, have the ability to like truly think from scratch and throw everything away and start over. So for us to see these new devices and just say, oh yeah, device, okay, desktop equals Windows, and there we go. Like, I don't blame us for that, but that's not, that's not the reality of the desktop, as I mentioned yesterday in the keynote. So Windows desktops on all these devices, is not the future of the desktop. The other thing that people though mention when they talk about the future of the desktop is they're like, oh yeah, it's cloud, right? Because we have the cloud right now. So the future desktop is like this cloud-based desktop, and that's where we're going. So let's try and focus on cloud desktops. And the thing is, I'll caution, we are not that good, as I showed with Henry Ford, at like thinking about the future in a way that's not the terms of our current lives. Like for example, the day before the iPhone was announced, it was rumored that Apple was going to be making a phone. I took the top 3 drawings, like of people's speculation, leaked photos, what they heard of what the iPhone is going to look like. Number 1, prediction of what the iPhone would look like day before Steve Jobs announced it. That's number 1, that is number 2, and that is number 3. So we have a Nokia, a Razr, and an iPod with Apple stickers on them, essentially. Or the iPod, we add buttons to it, and now it's a phone. Like, we don't know any better. Like, this is all we have because we can't think like completely from scratch. Which is why, if I ask you right now to don't do it. Close your eyes and just dream the cloud desktop, huh? How many of you are thinking about something like this? Right? It's like in a browser, it's cloud, it comes from Amazon or like, the planets or whatever, but it's, it's got icons, and it's got a start button, and like a clock in the corner, and it runs on Chromium, So I have a pretty good feeling that this is not the future of desktops. And even when we say the cloud desktop, it ain't this. So that said, in order for us to really understand the future of the desktop, we have to kind of look at the past and look at sort of how we got into this current desktop mess that we are in. We're going to go back, can you believe, next BriForum, it'll be 20 years since Windows was created. So July 93 is when Windows NT 3.1 comes out. And so, interestingly, all the way now through Windows 8, I don't know if there's anyone from Microsoft in the room that can correct, maybe you would know. I bet you there's some lines of code in there that are the same, right? If not identical lines, it's the same product. It's been modified, fixed. But from Windows NT 3.1 to Windows 8, I mean, it's the same heritage of the same product. So this Windows 8 product, which is not even yet released, has its architectural underpinnings when this was our top-of-the-line mobile machine. Of course, now not everyone used Windows. We had the Mac, like the hipsters, on the Macs back then. And the kids had their phones. This is all like CNET top-selling devices of July 93. iPads, I guess, were there also. But this was state-of-the-art when Windows was designed. Windows is our current gateway to our users. Everything that we're doing, the entire user experience, what we're delivering, was designed in these days when these devices were king. It was designed when one user equals one copy of Windows equals one device. And as you know, the entire world has moved on, except for Microsoft licensing, of course. But this is the world in which it was created. And in these days, by the way, there was competition. There was by no means a guarantee that Windows was going to win and be the platform that it became. Remember, there's OS2, and that was a big deal, kind of. And what Microsoft did is they were really good at encouraging people to use Windows. So they did things like the Visual Studio to develop Windows applications was free. It was on diskettes, but you could send them a postcard, and they mailed you the diskettes for free in the mail. And they basically, OS2 wanted to be secure and reliable and all this sort of stuff, and Microsoft was like, oh, well, we'll let you do whatever you want, right? It's like the kid that gives away their baseball cards to get you to be friends with them. You want a hard drive access to direct access to the hardware? Yeah, that seems fine. You want to hard code stuff to go to $C, hard code? Oh yeah, hard code. You want to write your own drivers to replace ours? I don't have a problem with that. Whatever it takes to get you to use Windows, we're going to do whatever we have to do. And we kind of got into this sort of hangover period because Microsoft made Windows so easy for people to develop, and they didn't want to tell anyone no. And they just said, yeah, you can do it. And here's the thing, the irony, so we can go right now and say, God damn them, they should not have done that, because that makes my job suck right now, which is kind of true. But if they had not done that, we might be at OS2 world right now. It's crazy, but it's true, So who can say? It's just the nature of how things ended up. But the problem with that, though, and that was fine for the first, 5 years or so as Microsoft has to start to get the momentum. But then after they got that momentum and started to realize, wow, this is complex, and we have application incompatibility issues and blue screens and wow, maybe we don't need to do all stuff in kernel mode and these kinds of things. The problem is they couldn't really do a clean slate and start over, because then they lose the advantage that is the lock into Windows that everyone has anyway. So we see that Windows in the past 20 years became this. I'm sure this was beautiful when it was new, And then we add on, can't ever delete anything, can't ever cancel. We just build, because this whole ecosystem supports this. And so this is the environment that as Windows we have to support. Windows has to support sort of everything that has happened for the past 20 years, more or less. And so that to us, remember, for us, Windows, it is the gateway we have to our users through end-user computing. Everything we do is through Windows. And so we understand that if a user, if we deliver a desktop to a user, and that desktop initially, it might look pretty nice, but as time goes on, it looks, it's more and more personal to our users. And they find things and install things and customize things and configure things and just keep on going on and on and on. So anyway, what we find is that the fact that we are in this sort of pretty awful predicament with Windows, it's the way it is. We understand how we got there. And that's good to know, but it doesn't help us get out, I guess. But we understand the importance of it, and the person with 45 toolbars and the cats, that is their environment. We have to sort of respect that. So for us to look at the future, what is the future of that, and how we get beyond the desktop where we are today and towards the future desktop? I guess we actually have to ask ourselves, what is a desktop? Because for most of us, if I ask you what is a desktop, you probably think of the desktop, I guess, Most of us, when we think about desktops, we think of it's the wallpaper and the start button and the icons and that sort of thing. But this is calling this a desktop. There's a lot of stuff going on here, even to look at a very sort of straightforward one. And if we actually dig into what makes up this, what is an actual desktop, it's sort of more than one thing. I'll give a shout out to Scott Davis, VMware's end user computing CTO, who presented last year at BriForum and talked about how the desktop is a lot of different parts. And that got me thinking, and I agree 100%. And so I took that from you, and in the past years, here's what we've grown into. So the desktop, it's not just that grass field kind of thing. Like, if we think of what actually is, when I say a desktop, what is a desktop? Well, a desktop, first and foremost, it's the devices, it's the hardware interface, right? So I got a thing that I'm holding as hardware, and there's this OS that runs on it and interfaces with the CPU and the memory and all that, the hardware and USB and all that kind of stuff. So the desktop is the interface, like the actual kernel and the OS. The desktop, it's also the UI. So it's keyboard, mouse, it's screen, it's the ability for the user to interact with this device, including also like windows, maximizing, minimizing, buttons, all that kind of stuff. Like that is the desktop. The desktop is an application runtime, right? So I take an exe that's compiled for Win32 or whatever environment, and it runs. The desktop is providing the runtime that allows an executable to operate. The desktop is an application launcher. So whether it's start button, whether it's URL bar, whether it's icons in the background, it allows a user to think, I want to run this now, and they can somehow interact and make that program run. That is a desktop. A desktop is a provisioning target. So in today's world, when I say, hey, this user needs this application or this configuration, we install software on the desktop. We configure the login script which sets up the desktop. All of everything we do and say this user is able to get these applications and this systems and everything, that's all done via the desktop. It's this application integration. So dragging and dropping, OLE, cutting and pasting, moving around, all the fact that multiple applications can do things to each other or with each other or interact in some way, that's something what the desktop provides for us. The desktop, it is a security container. So the security container, I mean that when I log on to the desktop, right? And then from that desktop, it gives me my token. Then I can launch programs that it knows who I am. I can access network shares, resources. All of that, the container of who I am and what I can or cannot do is defined based on that desktop. And finally, it's a configuration container. Do I want dollar signs or euro signs, commas or periods? How do I spell December? That kind of thing. I configure that for the desktop, and then I have that for all of the applications in my environment and everything I'm doing. So what's interesting is all this. When I say what is a desktop, it's this. So if we look at like pictures of the desktop, it's all this stuff. It's not just the Microsoft Windows or Mac OS keyboard and mouse-based desktop. It is the UI in Chromium. It is the UI on Android and iOS and BlackBerry and all these things. So all of these things are the desktop. All 8 of those components exist in every single one of these things. Now, as we know, if we go back to our previous example, if all 8 of those boxes exist inside this phone right now, if I have a VDI, all 8 of those boxes also exist in my VDI. So if I just paint over this entire local device with my remote VDI, I'm saying like F you to your 8 desktop components, and I'm laying down my own 8 desktop components on top of it. But it's weird, because if I deliver a desktop to this thing, the app launcher is way shittier on the desktop I'm delivering than what this is, right? Because this has a great app launcher that has nice icons and I can swipe and find my apps, versus delivering a Microsoft Windows desktop with a teeny little start menu, and I got to push it and zoom, 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 and pan, 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 and try and do that, right? So I can paint over their components with my components, but doing so is a very bad user experience. So what I want to do is I want to look at the desktop, and I want to look at those 8 different components and start to figure out where do those components need to run given different usage scenarios. So given certain hardware, certain connection scenarios, certain users, I've got all 8 components that have to exist somewhere. Where can I pull them from the cloud? Where from Windows? Where from local device? Where from users? Where from databases? How do I assemble like all 8 of those together? Like for instance, on this device right here, of those 8 components, the device's hardware interface, well, that already exists on this thing, right? It interacts with the hardware, I can touch it. The UI. The UI already exists on this device. I don't need to give my own UI to this device. They already have a very nice UI. The app launcher, again, we mentioned, this thing has the ability to launch applications. We can say the same thing about the application integration. Right, like this thing, whether it's cutting, as simple as cutting and pasting, whether it's open in, whether it's the malware reading my contacts, whatever it is, that application integration already exists on this device. So if I want to deliver a quote-unquote desktop to this device, probably I shouldn't overwrite, the UI, the app launcher, and the integration. I shouldn't break any of this stuff because this works nice. And look at the differences on Android versus iOS versus BlackBerry. If I'm using an iOS, I know what my iOS widgets and buttons and app launchers are supposed to look like. So I want to leverage those, not paint over those. And this, by the way, applies also to physical desktops with keyboards and mice, right? If I'm delivering applications to these things, this device has app integration, UI, launchers. It's got all that. So if I'm delivering down applications to it, I don't need to overwrite whatever that thing has locally. By the way, ironically, what that laptop has locally, it might be Windows. I mean, I don't care, right? If the user has Windows on the laptop, they have the app launcher, they have the cutting and pasting, they have everything they need. But when I'm delivering applications, my data, my services, I don't need to paint over their Windows desktop with my own Windows desktop. They already have a desktop that works. Just give them the icon, let them use their app launcher. So these four aspects of the desktop, I can probably get from whatever device I'm delivering my applications or content or data to. Now for these other four components, well, the configuration container, when I'm configuring, who gets access to what, that's probably more of a user setting, I don't really want to say, I don't want to configure, well, actually, all this stuff. Configuration container, the provisioning target, when I provision who gets what applications, and the whole security container of who's allowed to do what. All of those aspects of the desktop, I can sort of group those together and call those, that's user-specific stuff. Which is, we've been talking about this for 5 years, focus on users, not on hardware, and SCCM12, that's their whole message, and I mean, even SoftGrid back in the day was talking about this kind of stuff. But you can say, hey, for provisioning, I want to give you Word, or maybe more importantly, I want to give you a word processor, or Salesforce, or Jabber, or whatever that is. And that's cool, but I don't want to give you Salesforce on your iPad, or Salesforce on your Windows, or Salesforce on the cloud. I'm no, you're Brian, you got Salesforce, right? So that's why the provisioning, what you can do in Salesforce, what you can't do, what access to data you have, how I configure your settings and the commas and the periods and where they are and how your spacing works. That's all user-specific settings. If I change time zones, I say Brian is in Central Time Zone. I don't really want to say Brian's iPod is in Central Time Zone, and Brian's Chrome is in Central Time Zone, and Brian's all this is in Central Time Zone. So some of these aspects that traditionally have been delivered as part of the desktop, we can start to break those out of the desktop and deliver them to the user. And again, this is nothing new. This is, AppSense, Res, SCCM. This is what they've been talking about for 10 years. And so what that leaves for us is it leaves that application runtime. And the application runtime is very application specific, right? The application runtime is based on the app. As they say, it is what it is. So we can argue all we want about what apps are better, like HTML5 versus native, Windows versus touch, whatever, right? But man, if the app you have to deliver to your users is a Win32 executable, that's okay. You have your runtime. But just because you have a Win32 executable app you have to deliver to your user doesn't mean you need to steamroller over everything with all the other 7 aspects of the desktop, right? That means that specific app needs a Windows runtime, but you can probably pull these 4 from whatever device they're on, pull those 3 from whatever you're using to configure your user environment, and then pop in all the application runtimes based on the app. Sometimes we're lucky and we have applications that have multiple runtime choices. So sometimes we have web apps and iOS apps and Android apps. So I run the iOS app on the iPhone, I run the Android app on my tablets, and I run the web app on everything else. That's cool. I love that a lot. But everything else, I don't need to steamroll and block all those other things. So for me, let's look at these 4 aspects of the desktop. There's device-specific things I care about. There's user-specific things I care about. Then all the rest is all the application runtime, and that's all mix and match. Now, whenever we're talking about the future of the desktop and the future of applications and access and all this kind of stuff, that app runtime, I kind of brushed over it like, oh, it is what it is, right? Let it go, carpe diem. But as you know, life is not so easy. And especially to people who are not here in this room right now, you're going to go back to your offices and be embroiled in the arguments about, tablets are better than desktops. And no, the future of desktop is Windows. No, it's not. Have you seen the Surface? Yes, it is. No, that's RT. It doesn't count. That's the conversation that people are having, right? So given everything we've talked about so far for the previous 45 minutes, you might be kind of conceptually on board, but as soon as you get back to work on Monday, it's all back to HTML5 versus Android versus Windows 8. So I want to give you some data and some ways to arm yourselves to be able to participate intelligently in that conversation as well. And the way that conversation, by the way, is mostly phrased is desktop versus tablets, right? Desktops being keyboards and mice, tablets being touch and touch. So how do you participate in the desktop versus tablets conversation? And by the way, the desktop versus tablets conversation comes in many forms, right? It's the keyboard is dead, it's we're living in a post-PC world, it's no, the desktop is dead, it's like no more PC. These are all different versions of the same conversation, which, if I'm being completely honest, this is all just the real conversation people want to have is that Windows is dead. And so how do you participate in the Windows is dead, no it's not conversation? Well, the first way to participate in that is to say, Windows is not dead. And Windows is not going anywhere anytime soon. Even after we have the nuclear Armageddon here, we will have, in this scenario, we will have Twinkies, we will have cockroaches, and we will have devices running Microsoft Windows. Of that, I'm probably that tank. So Windows is not going anywhere anytime soon. And even you can look at, the long tail concept, right? So Windows may become the long tail. Hey, even for most of us, it's very possible that most of us in this room today use more non-Windows apps than we do Windows apps. And the only Windows apps we use are the ones that either A, we use because we have a Windows laptop, so we're using Microsoft Office, but we could be on a Mac and use Mac Office just as easily. It's just we happen to have Windows. Or B, they're the corporate apps that the people who wrote them are dead, and we have to use them. But if given the choice, if the app performs, so my point is that even as more and more of our apps move off of Windows, there's going to be some applications, just like there's mainframe applications today, and yeah, we can pretty them up with terminal emulators that have mouse support and color support and fonts. That's all the Citrix Mobility Pack, FrameHawk, all that's what they're doing to Windows apps, which is fine. That's great. But Windows apps are going to be here for a long time. And by the way, Windows apps require Windows. So even in the future, when I've got that one remaining Windows app, good chances that's going to require a copy of Windows, which has a Windows kernel and DLLs and registry and licensing and all of that garbage. But anyway, so Windows apps are not going away anytime soon. But Windows apps, again, is only part of the conversation, right? It's PC versus tablet. Or tablet HTML5 or focused versus crazy, right? And all this conversation, PC versus desktop, the whole conversation here, whenever I listen to arguments, and this happened on our radio show also, whenever I listen to arguments, people are arguing in different dimensions. No one can win the argument because they're not arguing the same thing. They're arguing what's better, Fords or purple? It's just not the same. So when you're arguing what's better, real applications or simple featured applications, it's not the same thing. So in order to have this argument or conversation about Windows, not Windows, desktop, all these things, we need to break down all the elements of the argument. There's actually 4 sub-arguments that we need to have. And we can have each of those arguments or conversations separately. So the whole like PC versus iPad versus HTML5, here's the 4 conversations that are really happening. The first one is about native versus HTML. So what's better for applications? Native apps or HTML apps? The idea, the bias going in is that, hey, native apps are probably provide a better user experience because they can use the hardware better and they're like written for the specific devices. Native can be Windows apps, it can be iOS, Android, whatever. But HTML5 apps are, write once, run everywhere. That's the bias going in. Now, if you learned anything this week, you learned that HTML5 apps are just like Java, write once, test everywhere. Who told me that last night? You? Yes, David, thank you. So HTML5, right? Because did any of you see Dan Shapiro's session on HTML5 apps and how it works? And, there's all these APIs, but only this version of Chrome supports that API, and that one supports this, and this one renders it wrong, and all that kind of stuff. So the whole idea that we're going to write an application once, and it just runs everywhere magically, you don't automatically get that with HTML. And there's another thing is people have this other bias that, hey, local apps, native apps, they feel better, they work better offline. Well, HTML5 can do offline. Google Docs, that works offline now. Not just for read, but for write. I can type in drive.google.com offline and click new, create new documents, rename stuff, add comments, all that kind of stuff. I don't know how the hell it works. Something with Chrome, and it syncs up when I'm reconnected again. So this functionality can't exist. Dan Shapiro mentioned in his sessions, web apps, they can access GPS, they can access your camera, and there's that web RTC, real-time, whatever that was called, for like video. So the thing is, it turns a lot of web applications may not have taken advantage of all these, but that's just because the author of that application chose not to do that. There's nothing inherently about HTML5 apps that is really that different than native. And one of the things I give it as an example, as like this is Gmail. So here's like one Gmail interface. This is an HTML5 Gmail interface. Here's another HTML5 Gmail interface. And here's another HTML5 Gmail interface. These are all current Gmail interfaces, and these are all web apps. And this one is fun. This is the offline version. It's fine. Like you drag and drop, drag in attachments. It works. I mean, it's awesome. So I use this to sort of set the precedent that just because an app is written in HTML5 doesn't automatically mean that it's shitty user experience. Now, there still is advantages of HTML5 versus native apps. But the point is that when you're looking at tablets versus Windows versus all these things, whether your application is an HTML5 written app or whether it's a native app, that is an argument, but that's only part of the argument. For example, another part of this argument is touch versus the keyboard and mouse. So people like to talk about, touch is the future. No, the keyboard and the mouse is the future. And then, do you notice what happens when they talk about touch and keyboard and mouse? They try to jumble up like, but look at how nice iPad applications are, and if I use like websites that are not made for iPads, they suck. But now you see they're cross-breeding the arguments, and they're mixing the platform and the touchiness of the thing. And so the reality is, again, like as an example, just because you write an application in one format or another doesn't necessarily make it better or worse for touch. I'll go back. This is Google Reader, I think. No, this is still Gmail. What is this? I can't even see. Gmail. So here's Gmail on an iPad, and here's Gmail on an iPhone. And this is mail.google.com website for both of these, right? This is not the local app. This is the website. So you see that website has the intelligence in it. And by the way, this is the exact same URL that I go to for those previous 3 examples of the desktops. So now we see one single URL, 5 different user interfaces from the same app, right? My point with this is that Gmail is written in a very nice way, that it looks at your screen, figures out if you have a keyboard or mouse or not, and if it realizes you're on a tiny screen with only touch, it gives you a UI that is very easy to use. So as a web app, they chose to do that, but that happens not because it's a web app. We saw the same things with the Citrix Mobility Pack and some of the things it can do. We can add intelligence into Windows applications. Not a lot of them have it, but we can add intelligence into Windows applications that can tell whether or not what your orientation is and change what behaviors and what shows up on the screen. We can change the size of boxes based on your screen resolution. We can do these things. Again, not a lot of them have, but whether it's an HTML5 or a native app, or whether it's a good user interface for keyboard versus touch, these are two completely separate conversations. The third conversation, and this is a sort of major one, is what's better, full-featured versus focused, right? The idea with focused apps is it's a very simple app with a very simple tasks. There's no clutter, right? And full-featured apps have all the buttons and all the doodads. But what's interesting about this is people always usually think, oh, full-featured means desktop, means keyboard and mouse, and focused means touch. And there's a high correlation there, right? But it doesn't have to be. So I can have full-featured applications that do everything that are made for touch. It just has to be written that way. I can also have applications that run on desktop that are very simple applications, full screen mode, not a lot of extra buttons and knobs and dials on them. It's just that it happens that not a lot of them are like that. But you know why that's happened, by the way? Because keyboards and mice have existed for 20 years. So we've had 20-year head start to crapify our applications. The reason that Google Docs is a beautifully simple interface is because they've only had it for like 4 years. They haven't had time to fuck it up yet. So, but if they had that for 20 years, there's like 40, every iteration of Google Docs adds more crap into the menus, which we ask for, because we want it. So that's fine. But again, that's because it's not because it's an HTML, it's not because it maybe works on a tablet. Same thing, the reason these tablet apps are so simple is because tablets only existed 2 years ago. So watch how simple your tablet apps are in 5 years, right? And again, you can know this with your applications as they revise them, they add more and more features. So the conversation about full-featured versus focused, yes, we should have that conversation about do you want full-featured apps or focused apps? But understand, whether an app is full-featured or focused has nothing to do with whether it's touch-based or keyboard and mouse-based, and it has nothing to do with whether it is an HTML5 application or whether it's a native application. So the final thing we'll look at is what we're doing with the application. Is it an application that we're using to create content, or are we using it to consume content? So what's the purpose of it? Again, there's a high correlation of content consumption tend to be focused apps, tend to be for tablets. Content creation tend to be full-featured, which tend to work with devices with keyboards and mice. But that correlation is not necessarily one-to-one. So but again, we can't say that apps on tablets are better for consuming content. We can say, hey, the tablet maybe makes more sense for content consumption, and maybe when I'm building apps, I'll tune my apps for consuming content. But there's nothing about a tablet that says it has to be made for consuming content. It's just up to the person who wrote the app. So those 4 arguments, all of this conversation about Windows versus HTML versus runtime versus tablets versus touch, these are the 4 conversations that are kind of happening under the hood. So in the last 10 minutes, how can we, what's actionable here? This is a lot of okay, this is interesting, trivia, but what can we actually do about this within our current jobs? And when we bring it back to the future of the desktop, what does this mean for us? For me, the biggest thing to do is to focus on the apps. But the way that we focus on the apps is we do that by focusing on the users. And we have to understand, and these photos I've been using for 10 years, and I always repurpose them for different parts of the conversation. That for a long time, when we've looked at Windows applications and Windows desktops, we treated the users as if they were all the same. Now, granted, they can change their wallpaper, which is like making these cars all different colors, but it's all the same car, And now that you blame consumerization, you blame Steve Jobs, you blame, the interwebs, whatever, but these are our user base now. And so now this is what we have to support, and delivering that Windows desktop, Windows apps, it's not going to work for everyone. So the way we focus on this is by looking at use cases. The people who are doing amazing work with this, and I actually met with these folks when I was in the UK a few months ago for BriForum there. The UK, the Cabinet Office of the UK, they have a strategy around application delivery, device support, and user computing. And because it's like a UK government thing, it's all open, like open source or open information, Like it's published on their website. So if you Google this, you can find it. I'll tweet out the URL or just put it in the slide notes. All this stuff. So they built this entire strategy on how they classify and look at the users, the devices, everything that they do. And this is not some, like, if you're not a government agency, this is fine. This is a 60-page document that they have on the strategy and how you can build your own. I can't write it better than this. But what they do is they have 4 core tenets for how they look at deciding, for users, figuring out which combinations of applications and technology and devices they're going to deliver and support. So the first, they look at the application usage. So for this user, what apps do they use? Like, are they knowledge workers? Is the only line of business applications? Like, what is that portfolio of apps that each user uses? The next thing to look at is where is the user located, and are they mobile? Right? So are they always working in a trusted location? Are they working remote? Are they in and out? Are they everywhere? They look at the usage frequency for each application. So is this an everyday thing? Is it they're using it all day but 5 minutes here and there, or is it something that they're only using occasionally? And they also look at how they're interacting with that application. And so, are they is it content creation? Is it just consumption? Is it management? Management is like, you get the PowerPoint, you add some comments to it, or you make some quick edits, but you're not doing hardcore creation of it. And then by sort of looking at all this together and looking at all the different application technologies and devices they have and usage patterns, they can start to figure out which users should get which applications in which ways. And so they can say, okay, if you're using all knowledge worker and you're working from all over the place, maybe I need to do VDI for you because we need to deliver the whole package to you. So they can kind of put that together. So the whole conversation so far, as I said, it's been about the future of the desktop. And I spent a lot of time saying it's not VDI. The desktop needs to be broken up into these 8 different components. And these 8 components now need to be sort of grouped together, and these are given to AppSense, these are given to Citrix, these are given to VMware, these are given to Apple, and then kind of rebuilt on demand dynamically based on the devices and all that kind of stuff. So that's cool, and this is like a lot of sort of like theoretical stuff, but this is sort of the ways we can frame how we think about the future of the desktop. But I'm sure there's a burning question here that a lot of people are still wondering, which is based on this: what is the future of Windows? Because we are Microsoft Windows desktop professionals, by and large. And I talked about the way we frame the conversation, but people just want to know, flat out, is Windows dead? And from an IT management standpoint, the days of managing and delivering Windows desktops, those days will end. I mean, we're not talking right away, but I mean, 5, 10 years, we will be out of the Windows desktop management game. And fairly soon. Like for me, I've been 16 years in IT, and I'm looking shorter time than I've been in IT. We'll be out of the Windows desktop management game. It doesn't mean that Windows is dead, though, because when it comes to apps, Windows, you can't kill it. Because these Windows apps, as I said, an app runtime, it is what it is. So if an application runs on Windows, it's running on Windows. We're managing Windows, right? But now clear, we're not managing the Windows desktop in this scenario, right? In this scenario, Windows has become middleware. And Windows is, and probably at this point, frankly, it's probably going to run in our data center. Because that's the easiest for us, and I don't want to worry about VMs on client, native this and native that and all that garbage. It's just going to be flat out. I've got these last few remaining Windows apps. I'm going to run them probably as VDI VMs, because at that point, it's just a few, and it's easier than dealing with the complexities of the terminal server, and processing is super cheap, and Windows is old and still slow. So at that point, I've got some VDI stack there, and I'm running it disk lists, whatever, and that's cool. So I'm fine with Windows in my data center running, remoting that UI, but I'm using it as middleware to only remote a few aspects here and there. Maybe I'm FrameHawk, maybe I'm Citrix Mobility Pack, maybe I'm, what are all the other ones, JSON and Jeff Muir yesterday had a session on this. So Windows, it will live on as middleware, and I'll deliver to all these devices as I need to. And people say, is this putting a square peg in a round hole? And the answer is yes, but FML. I mean, that's just like we have Windows apps we have to run. Users want to use devices, don't have keyboards and mice. Okay, that's going to be awkward, but we'll make it work. Oh yeah, and here's where I mentioned, Jason Conger and Jeff Muir had a session yesterday about taking Windows applications and making them work on mobile devices with local UI. So it was cool. So watch that video. But here's what's key. Okay, I talked about we are not managing Windows on desktops in 5 years, 10 years, whatever that is, right? That doesn't mean that no one's running Windows on their desktop. It means we're not managing Windows on our desktop. So here's the Windows future, right? This is not the same thing as that desktop instance that we were managing, right? So when I say we're not managing that, when I say the Windows desktop is dead, I'm not I'm not saying that this here is dead. But think about it. This thing, right? This thing is a Metro thing. This is not a Surface. It can be Surface, it can be Dell, it can be Windows 8, desktop mode, whatever. What is this thing in 5 years to us? Is it still running Windows locally? Absolutely. But how do we view this thing in 5 years? We view it the same way we view everything else. It's got a UI. Okay, if you like Metro or not, whatever. If you're using it, you deal with it, you love it, that's cool. But you have a way to launch applications. You have a way to swipe around and do things. You have a way to, for your apps to integrate with each other. I don't need to paint that over with my Windows desktop. This, in 5 years, just fits into the same picture like everything else did, and all of these other components, as we discussed earlier, it all just becomes part of it. So Windows running on tablets, that's probably 20 more years. Windows running on desktops is 20 more years. But our future desktop is these 8 components broken up into different bits, and in 20 years, if you want to run Windows 20, that's cool, you go right ahead, but I'm not managing, there's no group policy in Windows 20. I'm dealing with, okay, you got your own UI, you got your own interface, your own cutting and pasting. I can deliver down my agents, my apps, my data, all that kind of stuff. And again, VMware, Citrix, RES, AppSense, that's all they're talking about here. So Windows dying is in the context of IT management of Windows. So I'll summarize on, 5 truths to keep in mind about the future of the desktop. So the first is that the Windows desktop applications will be around for a long time. I'll write these down and just post an email or something on this. Windows desktop apps will be around for a long time. Long time. Second, the Windows desktop today can be broken down into its core parts, into those 8 core parts, and by and large, we can do this today. So Windows used to be a monolithic thing. It's now 8 little bits. The third truth is that users will have access to lots of different devices. All these devices will have different form factors and different OSs. And by the way, if we do our job right, we don't care about this at all. Let them bring in whatever they want. Because that's not, we're not getting into a world with fewer choice for user devices. The fourth thing, of course, if you tell users they can't do something, they're going to do it anyway. So we think about that as we're delivering and supporting what we do. And then the final thing is that mixing these traditional Windows desktop applications with these new native applications and new devices is going to be clunky. But Windows apps, it is what it is. Frankly, with most of our Windows Enterprise apps, if we could have gotten them off Windows by now, we would have. So, when someone asks you about the future desktop, what do you think about the future desktop? What is the future of the desktop? You have to dig in to understand what they are asking you. Are they asking you about the future of Windows? Are they asking you about the future of the personal computer? Are they asking you about the future of devices with keyboards and mice? Or are they asking you about the future of end-user computing in general. Because while all related, these are actually 4 different questions that have 4 slightly different answers. The good news is that everything we've been doing for the past 15 years as desktop delivery professionals, delivering Microsoft Windows desktops, it prepares us for this. So we're in fine shape. But the thing I'll close on is the future of the desktop is not a Microsoft Windows desktop painted over whatever device the user happens to have. Thank you.